Sometimes when I'm scrolling on social media, looking at other pictures of deep sky objects that have been taken by other astrophotographers, I stumble across posts that are effectively me or my picture versus the Hubble Space Telescope. And there are many examples of that on Reddit, on Facebook, on Instagram, etc., etc. And if you're like me, it makes me want to dig deeper into the actual pictures that was taken by the Hubble, which is obviously a very expensive telescope that is relatively large and it's floating in space. Now those me versus Hubble pictures, I often have like mixed feelings about them because there are some good stuff about those pictures. They make us basically reach for something, reach for a goal, and that's really nice. But sometimes they also, I feel, kind of misrepresents what this me versus Hubble exercise really means, and in a way they demean the power of the Hubble telescope. Like one example that came on my feed recently was this one, where I see like adding up my telescope camera and all the equipment required to take this photograph and compare it to the cost of the Hubble telescope in 2021 dollars. The cost for the Hubble is 5,300,000 times more expensive than my equipment. Of course, the Hubble photo is better than mine, but how much better? Is it twice as good as mine? Is the Hubble telescope photo 100 times better than mine? How about 1,000 times better? I don't really know, but comparing cost versus outcome, is the Hubble Space Telescope photo more than 5 million times better than mine? If NASA calls me, I could save them so much money. And of course, I assume that this particular comment is tongue-in-cheek, right? Although this was posted on a very large astrophotography group where there's a lot of people who don't really know better and could take the poster at their word. And that's where I feel that we could be propagating misunderstandings, misconceptions like the Hubble telescope was overpriced, it was not worth it, we shouldn't have sent it in space, that kind of stuff, which to me is nonsense. Although I do understand that it lets you really like show off, have fun with your image, compare your image to something that was taken by the freaking Hubble telescope. It's incredible what we are able to do with our amateur equipment. It lets us celebrate what we're able to do, which is also amazing in and of itself. And there's something even more excellent with doing me versus Hubble pictures, is that there is a lot to learn if you decide to try your hand at it. And so that's why I saw all of those posts and I decided, yeah, I'm gonna try my hand at it. I am going to try from my rooftop balcony in Tokyo, one of the most light polluted cities in the world. I'm gonna try and take some images and compare them with images taken by the Hubble telescope. And we'll have a look together at the process, the uphill battle that I'm facing, and the results, how those results can be misrepresented, and then how we can represent them properly in the end. And what's great is that when you go through that process, you really have to learn a lot about astrophotography and the theory behind astrophotography as well. Okay, let's start by looking a bit at the Hubble telescope. So looking at the Wikipedia page, we can see a lot of information about the Hubble. One of the most important and interesting stuff and point of comparison to something like an amateur telescope that we have Earth-based is the diameter of the mirror is 2.4 meters. So that's taller than me. I could probably lie down on that slightly curved mirror and use it as a hammock, although I'm sure scientists would not be very happy with that. And the focal length is an incredible 57.6 meters. So it zooms in into its targets quite a lot. And something that's really cool about the Hubble telescope is that once it's paired with its digital sensors, it has a resolution of 0.05 arc seconds per pixel, or even with some of the sensors, 0.025 arc seconds per pixels. That, if you're familiar with astrophotography, is actually insane. But I'll give you a point of reference once we select the equipment that I'll use to try and go for an image that could rival the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, obviously, the Hubble telescope is huge and it's floating in space, so it does not have any light pollution to contend with, which is something I have to fight a lot from Tokyo, and it doesn't have any atmosphere to contend with, in particular because of the jet stream that is almost constantly above Japan. I get a lot of turbulences in the atmosphere, which blurs out the targets that I want to photograph. To give you an idea of how large the Hubble Space Telescope is, I have a picture of me standing next to a replica there. You can see it is somewhat large, and I also have my wife standing in front of the primary mirror of the Hubble Space Telescope, and yes, it is also quite huge. So based on that, how can we hope to compete with the Hubble Space Telescope? And the answer is we can't. We absolutely have no way as amateur astrophotographers of competing with the Hubble Space Telescope unless we cheat, and or we lie, or we go for a certain approach that someone like AstroBiscuit on his channel has gone with. I'll link to his video up above and down in the description because that's fascinating. That said, the proper approach is far too work intensive for me, and I want to reproduce the results that other astrophotographers have been getting for their me versus Hubble. So how can we hope to compete with the Hubble Space Telescope? It's an all-around amazing piece of equipment. And so how do we try to catch up with that? Well, we kind of don't. We do our best, but overall, we'll simply have to cheat. And to some extent, as you'll see in the final result and the way that we present it, we have to kind of lie / misrepresent it. But of course, we'll look at the proper comparison of the real Hubble result with our own real result. So the first step, of course, for me will be to select the target. And the simplest and the most popular target for those me versus Hubble comparisons is to use the Eagle Nebula, also known as Messier 16, that contains the ultra famous Pillars of Creation that was taken by Hubble a long time ago and then was retaken again as a celebration. It's an amazing picture, but not worry, we'll have a look at its full resolution image very, very soon when we do our final comparison. And now let me take you to the place where I have the equipment set up for that epic David versus Goliath matchup where David has absolutely zero chance, mathematically zero. It's not even 0.001, it's just zero chance of winning. So let's go to my rooftop balcony. So without further ado, this is the setup that we're going to use to try and match, and also to fail to match, the result of the Hubble Space Telescope on the Eagle Nebula. I'm going to explain how we're going to try to do that, and the best way, really, in my opinion, to get close to Hubble Space Telescope images is to imitate the Hubble Space Telescope. So, first things first, the Hubble telescope is a reflector design, meaning that instead of using lenses, it uses mirrors to gather light and focus it onto its camera sensor. This telescope here does exactly the same thing. It's not quite the same design as the Hubble, but it's quite close in that it has a primary mirror at the back and a secondary mirror that will shoot the light down to this blue camera here. So if I look down my telescope tube, you can see this massive, or not massive, it's only 15 centimeters or 6 inches diameter mirror at the back, and this thing here as the front is actually a secondary mirror, a flat secondary mirror that will reflect the light gathered by the primary at the back down onto this blue camera here, which is an astrophotography specialized camera. And actually, in theory, telescopes that are lens-based are actually superior to telescopes that are mirror-based because they lack something called a central obstruction. You see, we have a secondary mirror that sits in the middle of the light path, and that blocks some photons from being used by us. The Hubble Space Telescope has the same problem, and the big advantages of mirrors compared to lenses is that the larger they get, the more expensive lenses are, but mirrors are still somewhat cheap, especially compared to lenses. So that's what we're doing, and so we're going with this 15 centimeters or 6-inch diameter primary mirror. So it's still very limiting compared to the Hubble Space Telescope, and it's 2.4 meters diameter. And also looking at this telescope, that's like basically the size of my forearm. And because the Hubble telescope has a larger primary mirror, it can gather more light because there's more photons from the target that fall onto that mirror. And also, the larger the primary mirror is, the more details we can actually capture. And that's going to be a big part of how the Hubble telescope will easily win in this contest. And also where we can cheat / misrepresent what the Hubble telescope is capable of. Another thing that the Hubble Space Telescope uses is a camera like we have here, but the Hubble uses a monochrome camera. So most scientific cameras are actually monochrome because you get better resolution and better sensitivity with monochrome camera sensors. Unfortunately, I currently don't have one on hand, so mine here is a color camera. But I'm trying to catch up by having it be made for astrophotography. We have very small pixels of 2.9 microns each that should help us to gather as much details as we can based on the focal length of that telescope, which is roughly 60 centimeters compared to the 57 meters of the Hubble telescope. So again, we're kind of at a disadvantage, but whatever. At the same time, this camera can be cooled. So the sensor, we can cool it to like -5 degrees Celsius, -10 degrees Celsius. And this is because camera sensors, the hotter they are, the more noise they generate. Basically, the sensor misunderstands heat as light, and therefore it adds up noise. We don't have that issue here because we cool it down to such a low temperature that doesn't really matter anymore. Now, another thing that the Hubble Space Telescope does, because it has a monochrome camera, how does it get color? And actually on the Eagle Nebula M16, the Hubble telescope uses what is called the Hubble palette. It's not the actual colors that the human eye would see if you looked directly at that nebula, but these colors are scientifically accurate representations of the chemical composition of the nebula itself. So the Hubble telescope actually uses filters that will let in only a very specific sliver of color that corresponds to the color emitted by certain gases that float in those nebula in space, like the Eagle Nebula. And to do that, it actually uses filters on top of the camera. And this is such a filter for the amateur market. And you can see it looks almost like it's just a mirror. It doesn't like let light through. It does actually, but only for a specific wavelength. And if I put it closer to my camera lens, you'll see that in the background, everything is kind of blue-green. And this is actually the color, the very specific color that is emitted by oxygen atoms within that very distant nebula. We have a second filter that we can use. Again, it looks like a mirror, but if I bring it to the lens, you can see it adds a very red cast to the image in the deep red. This is actually the color that is emitted by hydrogen atoms within the nebula. And hydrogen atoms are the most numerous within those emission nebulae. And we have a third wavelength that is actually also in the deep red, which is for sulfur atoms within the nebula. So we are sampling the colors emitted by oxygen atoms, sulfur atoms, and hydrogen atoms, and then we can map those colors to red, green, and blue to get those stunning colors in Hubble images. And at the same time, by imitating what the Hubble does there, I will be rejecting a lot of the light pollution that I have in Tokyo because I select only slivers of colors. So only the light pollution that fits within that sliver of color will make it to my camera sensor. And so that is how we can hope to some extent to compete with the Hubble Space Telescope, at least with this amateur equipment that we have here. Now let me go into some further details. So we are using tiny pixels on our camera to try and achieve the best resolution, the best amount of details that we can possibly can. So tiny pixels, they will cover a smaller area of the sky so we can resolve more details in the end. We're using those filters, those called narrowband filters, to capture only those slivers of colors that we're interested in, just like the Hubble Space Telescope, and that takes care of the light pollution. And we're using the same design, or not quite the same, but a reflector type of design like the Space Telescope. We're also using this mount here, which will allow us to point to the Eagle Nebula, but also to keep track of it throughout the night, because from our point of view, it moves across the sky throughout the night because the Earth is rotating upon itself. Now, there's one more thing that we really have no way to deal with properly, which is the atmospheric seeing. Basically, the atmosphere in Japan is always in flux. It's always moving all around, and this is because we have basically the jet stream like flying above us. So the stars are very blurred out by the atmosphere, and the nebula is no different. It's very blurred out by the atmosphere. There's several ways we could deal with that. We could try a technique called lucky imaging, where we take many pictures that are extremely short, less than 1 second long, of the target, and then we only select the ones that are the least affected by the atmosphere. But we can't really do that with the method that I'm using, especially with the filters that we'll be using. So I have only another alternative, which is to wait for a night where the atmosphere is relatively stable. And it so happens that the forecast for tonight is exactly that. We should be getting but for Tokyo standards, decent seeing, so not much turbulence in the upper atmosphere, and so we should be able to get like as much detail as I can possibly get from Tokyo without going into space above Tokyo. And now that we are ready with all of this equipment there, we'll be able to point to the target, track it, and we will take many exposures of 5 minutes each. And I hope in that night to gather around 5 hours of data, and I will be using those narrowband filters to capture the light emitted by the oxygen atoms, sulfur atoms, and hydrogen atoms, and then I want to map them to the same color palette that the Hubble Space Telescope images use, and then we can compare the results. There's one more technique that I'll be using, and it's something that you may be familiar with if you use recent smartphones that have computational photography, where they have a feature that might be named something like super resolution or something like that. And what the smartphone does is that it takes multiple images of the target, and between each image, it relies on the movements of your hand, or it moves its own lens or sensor within the smartphone to have slight movements in between the images. And using that, it actually captures additional information that it can use to guess at a higher resolution. This is called dithering and drizzling. And it's fun. We can do exactly the same in astrophotography. Between each of my 5-minute pictures of the nebula, I will be basically moving the telescope one tiny bit. And then once we're done with the night, I will be stacking all of those exposures on top of one another. And that movement in between those exposures will be used to add additional data and additional details to the image. And actually, the Hubble telescope also does that. So we're not gaining an advantage, we're still just imitating the Hubble Space Telescope by this dithering and drizzling technique. Okay, so now I think I've gone through all of the techniques that we're going to use to try and match maybe like 1/1000th of the level of the Space Telescope with this amateur setup on my rooftop in Tokyo, Japan. And so I will take the images tonight, and I will see you once I have stacked all of them so I can show you how they look like after processing, and how they compare to the image of the pillars of creation taken by the Hubble telescope. So we'll see you inside, but before we do that, you may want to go and like the video. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices my videos, so the help is very much appreciated. You can let me know in the comments what you think about what I'm doing here, and if you've done this kind of Hubble versus your equipment type of challenges in the past. And if you are interested in this kind of videos and you're not subscribed to the channel, welcome to the channel. You may want to consider subscribing by clicking that subscribe button. And also, if you're planning on buying anything from Amazon, Agena, HighPoint, First Light Optics, astroshop.eu, if you do so after clicking one of the links that I have in the video description, it will help me out at no cost to you. If you want to help more directly, you can also join my Patreon as a paid member. I have a link down in the description, or join the channel as a member. You guys, you know it, you make the channel possible, and thank you so much for your generosity. Anyway, with that, let me capture the image of M16, and let's go together inside to look at the results and compare that to the Hubble Space Telescope. Okay, first, let's have a look at the Hubble image of those pillars of creation. It's very well known, but here I have it on my screen, and you may or may not notice that I'm already cheating / misleading you. And we'll know exactly why if you don't really know yet why that is in a moment. But this is the beautiful image from the Hubble Space Telescope of the core of the Eagle Nebula, those pillars of creation, nicknamed so because of all of the gases in there that can basically go together to create new stars. It is a star nursery. And it is an amazingly beautiful and haunting image. Now, what did I manage to achieve? Well, first let me show you the results in monochrome of the 3 wavelengths, those 3 slivers of colors that I was mentioning earlier, because this is exactly what the Hubble Space Telescope does. So we have the deepest red here from the sulfur atoms. We have the blue-green here from the oxygen atoms. And then we have the deep red from the hydrogen atoms. So we've managed to isolate those wavelengths, those colors, onto monochrome images. In reality, I was using a color camera with dual band narrowband filters, but we're still able to separate it in a way that the Hubble Space Telescope also does. And then, because the real color of combining those images would be basically pure red, we're going to do the exact same processing technique that the Hubble Space Telescope uses, which is it looks at the wavelengths, those colors from blue to red, and it says the bluest one is the oxygen, the second one after that is hydrogen, and then the third one after that is sulfur. And then when you think about our eyes, red, green, and blue cones to detect light, the blue color is to the leftmost of the spectrum, the green color is in the middle, and red color is to the right. So it makes sense to kind of map this oxygen to blue, the hydrogen to green, and then the sulfur to red, because we're following effectively the same order. It's not what our eyes would perceive if we could have a look directly at the nebula, but it is a cool representation of the chemical composition of the target. And this is why we get such images. This kind of color, by the way, is, again, it's like fake color, but true science. It's called the Hubble palette, simply because it was used for the Hubble pictures, and I'm going to do exactly that with my picture, although it's going to be slightly less successful. And you can see in the end, this is the picture that I'm taking. And at first glance, doesn't it look amazing? We have a similar type of color scheme, and we do have very visibly, very sharp and very nice to look at. I can even zoom in the pillars of creation, just like the Hubble. That's amazing, right? That's a lot of fun. It's incredible. I strived for a goal from a super light polluted city, and I spent only one night on it with amateur equipment, and here I am, able to look at the pillars of creation that have been so dramatically revealed to us in the past by the Hubble Space Telescope. And I get bonus stuff as well. Because I have a wider field of view, because I don't zoom as much, I have tons of details from the nebula around the pillars of creation. So I'm seeing more stuff than the Hubble can. It's amazing. And that's a bit going too far, because we're starting to really misrepresent what's happening with the Hubble Space Telescope. Because let's put those 2 images side by side. And here we have the 2 images side by side. We have my image on the left, the Hubble image on the right. And I'm still cheating. I'm still misrepresenting the data. But you can see, even then, it's very obvious that the Hubble image has better colors, better contrast, better details. It's overall much sharper. Everything is in favor of the Hubble image, even with my cheating. And if I drag and drop the images on top of the other, we're basically roughly at the same zoom level. You can see this is Hubble and this is me, right? It's still, I'm very, very happy with what I'm getting. I get like the rays of light out of that little thump there, just like the Hubble does. I get those details here. I get the resolution of all of those small details everywhere. I get this little thing here is available there on my image. And that's absolutely amazing. But now, let's do something that I cannot really do with my image. Let's zoom in. So I'm going to zoom in to these details there. And you can see I start getting some weird pixelation, and I'm not able to get a lot of details in there despite all of the techniques that I've used. I've used the super resolution technique that is used in our modern smartphones. I've used narrowband filters. I've gotten rid of a lot of the Tokyo light pollution. I did my best, and I did my best processing, but Let's zoom in on the same area in the Hubble. Look at the incredible difference that we have here. Now suddenly, I'm not so proud of my image anymore, right? I mean, it's still an amazing image, but it does not hold, as expected, a candle to the Hubble image. Let's zoom in some more, like here. Look at that. Look at how much I can zoom on the Hubble image and still be able to see all of those details. That little thing there, I don't see it. I barely guess it in my image. That bump there, I kind of have it there. That is the huge difference between Hubble images and amateur images. And we can do the same for any area there. We can look at here, the thumb at the top, and there you can see, look at how incredibly different the Hubble image is. And this is not just for beauty, it's also for science. Like remember the Hubble deep field images with all of those galaxies all over the place, absolutely insane stuff. And look at that, it's not even a comparison there, like this little thing there. I don't have it in my image at all. This black bump here is actually this really well resolved thing on the Hubble image. And let's now open up the Hubble image in full screen to really appreciate it in all of its glory. I have shivers right now, shivers. I have seen it millions of times, but I have shivers just looking at that. It's absolutely amazingly beautiful. And those details that we get, this little blob there on the side that we get, all of that is absolutely incredible. Look at this. Look at this. Just would you look at this? It is just absolutely insane. This is the full resolution image from the Hubble archive, effectively. It's over 100 megabytes in size, and look at how amazing it is. And that is why I can say without hesitation that the Hubble image is millions of times better than my own image, simply because it's able to find stuff that no other telescopes were able to find or see. Stuff that I could not even fathom in my image, I could not even detect at all in my image, are super clearly visible in the Hubble image. So in that respect, we're going from zero to a huge amount. So I could even argue that the Hubble image is infinitely better than my own image, if you see what I mean, right? And I'm sorry if this video is becoming a love letter to the Hubble Space Telescope, because it really is. And it's a love letter to amateur astrophotography as well, because we can get amazing results from our backyards or from my rooftop balcony here in Tokyo. Let's go back to the initial image, the initial post on Facebook that actually triggered my run down the rabbit hole there of the me versus Hubble kind of images. And it is this post here, which is amazing. On the top, you have the Hubble image, and at the bottom, you have this amateur backyard image using a very standard telescope. He used a very similar telescope to mine, except a slightly different design called the Schmidt-Cassegrain, and his aperture was slightly higher, larger than mine at 8-inch compared to the 6-inch that I have, and he got this amazing image. And again, if you were to just like compare it to the Hubble image, you'd be like, wow. Is the Hubble even necessary if we can achieve this kind of incredible results with amateur equipment from our backyards, right? But, and again there's a but, let's now go to the full resolution of this particular galaxy image from the Hubble. And that's where things completely take a turn, because I can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and look at the insane amount of details that we get in this galaxy that is millions of light years away from us, and yet we can see individual stars within that galaxy. We can see individual nebulae within that galaxy. This is just an insane, absolutely mind-boggling image that we simply were not able to achieve with Earth-based telescopes, at least at the time. And I love this. I absolutely love this. Look at this star cluster with this nebula around it. Look at this little nebula there. These are nebulae in another galaxy. I don't know about you, but mind blown for me. And again, I'm getting those like shivers, man. The Hubble Space Telescope can see the individual stars that the amateur telescope cannot hope to even detect. So again, we have no detection versus really clear detection. So I argue that the Hubble Space Telescope image is infinitely better. And really, that's what we can get with amateur astrophotography, because it's actually awesome to do this kind of me versus Hubble stuff, because it forces us to do our best to really fine-tune our techniques. And there's so many techniques in astrophotography, from the capture to the guiding, the dithering, to the drizzling, to the stacking, to the processing. Everything is important, and we can fine-tune all of our skills there to go as close as possible to the Hubble Space Telescope. And I absolutely love that. It's a very positive activity. It's just that when it goes outside of astrophotographer circles, then it can be misunderstood by others as why do we spend that much money on the Hubble Space Telescope if we can achieve that with just amateur telescopes? What is the big deal? And the deal is absolutely insane. What are your thoughts on this? Have you tried doing this kind of challenge in the past? Let us know the results down in the comments. While you're there, like the video. It really helps the channel get noticed. And if you're new to the channel and you like this kind of video, you may want to subscribe. And if you want to support the channel even more, and you are planning on buying anything from Amazon, Gina, High Point Scientific, First Light Optics, AstroShop EU, etc. If you do so after clicking the links that I have in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. If you do want to help me out more directly, then you can also join my Patreon as a paid member. There's a link down in the description, or join the channel as a member with the join button next to the subscribe button. It makes the channel possible. There's no two ways around it. And thank you so much for your generosity. But with that, I hope that you liked this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.